The asphalt of the desolate 95 shoulder tasted of oil, grit, and his own copper blood. Marcus Vance couldn't breathe. The crushing weight of a knee drove into his spine, pinning him like a specimen against the freezing ground. "Stop resisting!" Officer Miller screamed, the command dripping with a dark, breathless excitement that contradicted the stillness of the boy beneath him. It was a sick irony. Marcus's arms were trapped beneath his chest, useless, pinned by his own body weight and the officer's immense force. He gasped, a wet, ragged sound, as a heavy boot slammed into his ribs, cracking the silence of the night. Pain, sharp and white-hot, exploded in his chest, radiating outward like a starburst of agony. "Please!" Marcus wheezed, spit mixing with the blood from his split lip. "My ID! I told you! It's in the bag!" "Shut up, thug!" Miller growled, leaning harder, the pressure making Marcus's vision swim with sickening black spots. "We know exactly what you are." 30 minutes before the world collapsed, the night had been a symphony of quiet success. Marcus Vance, 19 years old and wearing the confident ease of a young man who had never known true hunger or fear, tapped his fingers against the leather steering wheel of his Audi A5. The car was a sleek phantom in the moonlight, a charcoal gray testament to his father's pride. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a reward. A tangible well done for making the dean's list at Georgetown University for the third consecutive semester. The interior of the car was a sanctuary against the biting November wind that whipped through the D.C. suburbs. The heater hummed at a comfortable 72 degrees, smelling faintly of new leather and the vanilla air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. Marcus was alone on the road, the stretch of I-95 heading north toward Silver Spring, relatively empty for a Friday night. He wasn't thinking about police. He was thinking about constitutional law. He was thinking about the paper he had just finished drafting in the university library, a treatise on the Fourth Amendment and the erosion of privacy in the digital age. He smiled to himself, imagining his father's critique. Julian Vance was a hard man to impress, but he was fair. He demanded excellence not for the sake of vanity, but because he believed excellence was the only armor a black man could wear in America that might deflect a blow. "Miles Davis," Marcus whispered, adjusting the volume as blue and green drifted through the high-end speakers. The trumpet was melancholic, piercing, perfect for the solitude of the drive. He checked his speedometer, 53 miles per hour in a 55 zone. He was in the right lane. His lights were on. His registration was current. He was the embodiment of the talk his father had given him when he turned 16. "You are not like your friends, Marcus," Julian had said, his voice dropping to that register he used when addressing a jury. "You cannot make mistakes. You cannot have a tail light out. You cannot speed. You cannot argue. When you are behind the wheel, you are a target first and a citizen second." Marcus had thought his father was being dramatic back then. Julian Vance, the Attorney General of the state, saw the world through the lens of worst-case scenarios. But Marcus respected the rules. He respected the law. He was studying to be a guardian of it, just like his dad. Then the world changed color. It wasn't a sound at first, but a visual assault. The rearview mirror, previously a frame for the receding darkness, exploded in a strobe of red and blue. The lights were aggressive, blinding, washing out the cream leather interior with a bruised, violent purple hue. Marcus's stomach dropped, a primal inherited reflex that bypassed logic. "Calm down," he told himself. "You weren't speeding. It's probably a mistake. Or maybe a taillight he didn't notice." He signaled right. 3 blinks. He slowly drifted to the shoulder, easing the Audi off the asphalt and onto the gravel. He put the car in park. He turned off the music. He rolled down the window. He turned on the interior dome light. He placed his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, fingers spread, visible. He took a deep breath, inhaling the vanilla scent that now seemed cloying. He watched the side mirror. 2 doors opened on the cruiser behind him. 2 shadows emerged against the glare of the headlights. One was massive, a silhouette of bulk and aggression. He walked with a heavy, rolling gait, hand resting casually on his belt. That was Officer Miller. The other was slighter, moving with a twitchy, nervous energy, staying a few paces back, closer to the traffic lane. That was Officer Kowalski. Marcus watched them approach. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple despite the cold air rushing in through the window. Be polite. Be professional. You are Julian Vance's son. Officer Miller didn't say hello. He didn't ask if Marcus knew why he had been pulled over. He walked up to the window, clicked on a heavy-duty tactical flashlight, and shone it directly into Marcus's eyes. Marcus flinched, blinding white spots dancing in his vision, but he didn't move his hands from the wheel. "License and registration," Miller demanded. His voice was like grinding gravel, rough, bored, and laced with an undercurrent of hostility. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said, his voice steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "The registration is in the glove box. My license is in my wallet, which is in my back pocket. I am going to reach for them now." Miller didn't respond immediately. He moved the beam of the flashlight away from Marcus's face, sweeping it through the car. It lingered on the leather seats, the high-end dashboard, the textbooks in the back, constitutional law, principles and policies visible on the spine. "Nice car," Miller said. It wasn't a compliment, it was an accusation. "Whose is it?" "It's mine, sir," Marcus replied. "A gift from my father." "Must be a nice dad," Miller scoffed. "What's he do? Run numbers?" Marcus stiffened. The insult was lazy, racist, and tired, but he swallowed the anger. Survive. "He's a lawyer, sir." Marcus moved his hand slowly to the glove box. "Stop!" Miller roared, his hand dropping to the grip of his service weapon. Marcus froze, his hand hovering inches from the dashboard latch. "Officer, I was just getting the—" "I didn't tell you to move yet," Miller snapped. He leaned in closer, his face inches from the open window. Marcus could smell stale coffee and tobacco. "You in a rush, kid? You got somewhere to be?" "No, sir, just heading home." Miller sniffed the air loudly, once, twice. He pulled back, a theatrically grim expression on his face. "I smell marijuana," Miller announced. Marcus blinked. "Sir, I don't smoke. Nobody has ever smoked in this car. That's impossible." "Don't tell me what I smell," Miller said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I smell unburnt cannabis, strong odor. That gives me probable cause. Officer, I attend Georgetown University. I'm a pre-law student. I would be happy to take a drug test right now. There is no marijuana in this vehicle." Miller chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He looked back at Kowalski, who was standing by the rear fender looking uncomfortable. "You hear that, Kowalski? He's a pre-law student. He knows his rights." Kowalski shifted his weight. "Sarge, maybe we just check the ID and—" "Shut it!" Miller snapped without looking back. He turned his attention back to Marcus. "Step out of the vehicle, now!" "Officer, am I under arrest?" Marcus asked, his training kicking in. He knew he shouldn't exit the vehicle unless ordered for a lawful reason, but the odor of marijuana was the oldest trick in the book. It was unprovable and gave them carte blanche. "I said, step out of the car, or I will drag you out," Miller said, reaching for the door handle. Marcus undid his seatbelt. He knew that if he refused, things would escalate instantly. He opened the door and stepped out into the freezing night air. Miller grabbed him by the shoulder of his varsity jacket, the wool scratchy against his neck, and spun him around. He shoved Marcus hard against the side of the Audi. "Spread 'em!" Miller barked. He kicked Marcus's ankles apart hard enough to bruise the bone. Marcus rested his forehead against the cold metal of the roof. He felt the officer's hands patting him down. Rough, invasive, searching. They found his wallet, his phone, a pack of gum. "Check the car, Kowalski," Miller ordered, keeping one hand firmly planted in the middle of Marcus's back. "Sarge," the younger officer started. "Search the damn car." Marcus watched from the corner of his eye as Officer Kowalski leaned into the pristine interior of the Audi. He watched as the young officer opened the center console, shifting the sunglasses and charging cables. He watched as Kowalski opened the glove box, pulling out the owner's manual and the registration. "There's nothing here, Sarge," Kowalski called out after a moment. "It's clean." Miller's grip on Marcus's neck tightened. "Look harder, under the seat." Kowalski crouched down. "Nothing, just some wrappers." Miller let out a sigh of frustration. He released Marcus and stepped back. "Stay there, don't move a muscle." Miller walked over to the driver's side door. He stood there for a moment, his back to Marcus, blocking the view of the interior. His body language was rigid, purposeful. He reached into his own tactical vest pocket. It was a subtle movement, a dip of the shoulder, but Marcus saw it. Miller leaned into the car. He rustled around under the driver's seat for a few seconds. "Well, well, well," Miller said, straightening up. He turned around. In the beam of his flashlight, he held up a small, clear plastic baggie. Inside, white powder clumped together like wet snow. "Nothing, huh?" Miller's voice was triumphant. "Looks like cocaine to me. Felony possession. Intent to distribute, given the amount." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him lightheaded. The world tilted on its axis. "That's not mine," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "You just put that there. I saw you reach into your pocket." The air charged with electricity. Miller's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of fury. "Are you accusing an officer of the law of planting evidence?" Miller shouted, stepping into Marcus's personal space. "I saw you!" Marcus yelled, desperation clawing at his throat. "Check the dash cam! I saw you!" "Resisting arrest!" Miller roared. He didn't reach for handcuffs, he lunged. Miller's shoulder slammed into Marcus's chest, knocking the wind out of him. They hit the gravel hard. Marcus wasn't fighting back. He knew better than to raise a hand to a cop, but he curled up instinctively to protect his face. "Stop fighting!" Miller screamed for the benefit of the recording, though Marcus was entirely passive. Miller drove a fist into Marcus's kidney. The pain was nauseating, a deep, dull thud that made Marcus gasp. "Get his legs, Kowalski!" Miller yelled. The younger officer hesitated, then rushed forward, grabbing Marcus's thrashing legs. "I'm not resisting!" Marcus cried out, turning his head to the side. "Please, I'm not—" Miller grabbed the back of Marcus's head and slammed it into the asphalt. Crack! Stars exploded in Marcus's eyes. A high-pitched ringing filled his ears. He tasted copper. His lip was split. His cheekbone felt like it was on fire. Miller shifted his weight, driving his knee into the center of Marcus's back, right between the shoulder blades. He pressed down with all of his 240 pounds. "You think you're smart?" Miller panted, the exertion evident in his voice. "You think you're better than us with your fancy school and your fancy car?" He grabbed Marcus's right arm and wrenched it behind his back, twisting it until the shoulder joint screamed in protest. "You're nothing," Miller whispered, low enough that only Marcus could hear. "Just another statistic." Marcus couldn't breathe. The knee on his back was compressing his lungs. He wheezed, trying to suck in the cold, oily air of the roadside. "My dad!" Marcus choked out. "I don't care about your daddy," Miller said, finally snapping the handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists. He tightened them aggressively, the metal biting into the skin. Miller stood up, hauling Marcus to his feet by the handcuffs. A jolt of agony shot through Marcus's shoulders. His legs were jelly. He stumbled. "Walk!" Miller shoved him toward the cruiser. Marcus looked at Kowalski. The young officer was pale, staring at the blood dripping from Marcus's chin onto the varsity jacket. "You saw that," Marcus rasped, looking the rookie in the eye. "You saw what he did." Kowalski looked away, staring at his boots. The ride to the 4th Precinct was a blur of nausea and throbbing pain. Marcus sat in the back of the cruiser, his hands numb behind him, his head resting against the plexiglass divider. He watched the streetlights streak by, each one a blur of light that made his headache pulse. He didn't cry. He wanted to, but he wouldn't give Miller the satisfaction. He focused on his breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Miller drove in silence, humming a tune under his breath. He seemed relaxed, the adrenaline of the violence having settled into a smug satisfaction. When they arrived at the station, the humiliation continued. Miller paraded him through the booking area. Other officers looked up, Some looked indifferent. Others looked at Marcus's swollen eye and bloody lip, with a flicker of concern that was quickly extinguished when they saw who brought him in. "Possession with intent," Miller announced to the desk sergeant. "Assault on an officer. Resisting." The sergeant, a balding man with tired eyes, looked at Marcus. "He assault you, Miller? You look fine." "He went for my gun," Miller lied effortlessly. "Had to subdue him." The sergeant sighed and opened a file. "Name?" "Marcus Vance," Marcus mumbled through his swollen lip. "Speak up," Miller shoved him. "Marcus Vance!" They took his fingerprints. The ink stung the cuts on his hands. They took his mugshot. Marcus stood against the gray height chart, his varsity jacket torn, his face a map of violence. He tried to stand tall to keep his chin up, but he felt hollowed out. They stripped him of his shoelaces, his belt, and his watch. They took the Audi keys. Finally, they walked him to a holding cell. It was a concrete box with a steel bench and a toilet that smelled of ammonia and old urine. Miller unlocked the door. "Enjoy the accommodations, Prince." He shoved Marcus inside and slammed the heavy barred door. The clang echoed with finality. Marcus sat on the cold bench. He was alone. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the true extent of his injuries. His ribs burned every time he inhaled. His vision in his left eye was blurry. A few minutes later, the booking sergeant walked by. He stopped and looked through the bars. Maybe he saw the fear in the kid's eyes. Maybe he saw that Marcus didn't look like the usual Saturday night intake. "You get one call, kid," the sergeant said, his voice devoid of malice, just tired routine. He slid a battered, heavy plastic phone through a slot in the bars. "Make it count. Local only." Marcus took the phone. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He stared at the keypad. He knew who he was supposed to call, a lawyer, a bail bondsman, but he was 19 years old. He was hurt. He was scared. He dialed the number he had memorized since he was 6. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" The voice was deep, warm, familiar. The sound of it almost broke Marcus. It was the sound of safety. It was 11:45 p.m. "Dad?" Marcus croaked. His voice was a broken, unrecognizable thing. There was a pause on the other end. The warmth vanished instantly, replaced by a razor-sharp alertness. "Marcus, what's wrong? Where are you?" Marcus leaned his forehead against the cold steel bars. A single tear escaped his swollen eye, cutting a clean track through the dried blood on his cheek. "I'm at the 4th Precinct. On the Beltway," Marcus whispered. "Dad, they beat me. They planted drugs on me. They said I went for a gun." "Are you safe right now?" Julian Vance's voice was deadly calm. It was the calm of the eye of the storm. "I'm in a cell, Officer Miller and Kowalski. My face, Dad, I think my ribs are broken." "Listen to me very carefully, son," Julian said. "Do not say another word to anyone. Do not sign anything. Do not eat or drink anything they give you." "Dad, I'm scared. They said I had cocaine." "Marcus," Julian said, and his voice carried a weight that seemed to vibrate through the phone line, a promise of impending devastation. "I am coming. I am coming right now. You just hold on. Do you hear me? You hold on." "I hear you," Marcus whispered. "I'm on my way." The line went dead. Marcus lowered the phone. He curled his legs up onto the bench, hugging his knees to his chest, trying to preserve body heat. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing. Officer Miller had just made the biggest mistake of his life. In the quiet, affluent enclave of Potomac, Maryland, Julian Vance lowered his phone from his ear. The device felt heavy, like a stone. He stared at the screen for a second before setting it down on his mahogany desk, right next to a framed photo of Marcus at his high school graduation. Julian was a man of immense control. As the Attorney General, he dealt with the darkest aspects of humanity daily: human trafficking, corruption, murder. He had trained himself to compartmentalize, to build walls of logic and procedure around the fires of his emotions. But tonight the walls shattered. A cold, white-hot rage flooded his veins. It wasn't the frantic panic of a parent. It was the calculated, lethal fury of a predator whose cub had been taken. His son, his Marcus, the boy who practiced his debates in front of the mirror, the boy who still called his grandmother every Sunday. Beaten, framed, caged. Julian stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He didn't run to the door. He moved with a terrifying sense of purpose. He walked to his closet. He stripped off his reading robe and pajamas. This wasn't a time for suits. A suit was a uniform of the court, of negotiation. Tonight, he wasn't negotiating. He pulled on a pair of dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt. He threw on a heavy Georgetown law hoodie. He grabbed his sneakers. He returned to his study and opened the biometric safe built into the drawer. Inside lay his personal firearm, a Glock 19, and his badge wallet. He took the badge. He left the gun. He knew that if he brought a weapon, he might use it, and Julian Vance needed to be the law, not the executioner. Not yet. He picked up his phone again. He didn't dial a defense attorney. He dialed Sarah Jenkins, his deputy attorney general and the head of the Civil Rights Division. "Sir?" Her voice was groggy. It was nearly midnight. "Sarah, wake up. I need a level 1 mobilization." The sleep vanished from her voice instantly. "What's the target?" "The 4th Precinct, State Police Jurisdiction. I want the Special Investigations Unit there in 20 minutes. I want a preservation order on all digital evidence, body cams, dash cams, booking room audio, everything." "Sir, the 4th? That's Henderson's house. What happened?" "They have my son," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "They beat him. They planted drugs on him." There was a silence on the other end, heavy and pregnant. Sarah Jenkins knew Julian Vance better than anyone. She knew what this meant. "I'm rolling," she said. "I'll call the state police commander. We'll meet you there." "No," Julian said. "You meet me there, but I'm not waiting." He hung up. He walked out to the garage, bypassing his sleek sedan for the black government-issue SUV. It was armored, equipped with a hidden light package and a police radio. He hit the ignition. The engine roared to life, a mechanical beast waking up. As the garage door rose, revealing the dark, quiet street, Julian Vance gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "Hang on, Marcus," he whispered to the empty car. "Daddy's coming." The 4th Precinct was a bunker of beige brick and fluorescent light situated just off the highway. Inside, the atmosphere was one of drowsy routine. The night shift was settling in. Phones rang sporadically. The coffee machine hissed in the corner. Officer Miller sat at his desk, leaning back in his chair, feet up. He was eating a bagel, wiping crumbs off his chest. He felt good, powerful. The adrenaline of the arrest had faded into a smug satisfaction. He had taught that rich kid a lesson. He had taken a luxury car off the street. He was already composing the narrative in his head for the report. Suspect was belligerent, erratic behavior, reached for waistband. It was a story he had written a dozen times before. "Hey, Kowalski," Miller called out, his mouth full. "You finished that log yet? Make sure you tag the evidence correctly. Suspected cocaine." Kowalski was sitting at a smaller desk across the aisle. The rookie looked pale. He hadn't touched his coffee. He kept glancing at the door to the holding cells. "Sarge, I don't know," Kowalski said quietly. "He didn't really resist. And that baggie—" Miller's feet dropped to the floor with a thud. The jovial mood evaporated. He glared at the younger officer. "What about the baggie, Kowalski?" Miller asked, his voice low. I didn't see where it came from." "It came from under the seat," Miller said, emphasizing every word. "I found it. You were there. You secured the scene. Are you saying you didn't do your job?" "No, Sarge, Listen to me, kid." Miller stood up and walked over, looming over the rookie. "There is no gray area here. There is us, and there is them. That kid, he's a perp. He hates you. He would shoot you if he had the chance. We go home at night because we do what is necessary. Do you understand?" Kowalski swallowed hard. "Yes, Sarge." "Good. Now finish the paperwork. And if anyone asks, he tripped on the curb. Got it?" "Got it." The desk sergeant, an older man named Reynolds, looked up from his computer. "Hey, Miller, you got a visitor. Someone just pulled into the lot, driving like a maniac." Miller frowned. "Who? The kid's lawyer already?" "I don't know. Big black SUV. No markings." Miller walked to the front window and peered through the blinds. He saw the vehicle skid to a halt in the no parking zone right in front of the main entrance. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hoodie and jeans. He moved with a stride that ate up the ground. Miller chuckled. "Looks like Daddy's here. Probably thinks he can buy his way out of this." He adjusted his belt, resting his hand near his taser. "Watch this, Kowalski. Let me show you how to handle an irate parent." Miller walked to the front of the room, leaning against the high counter of the intake desk, a smirk playing on his lips. He waited for the doors to open. He had no idea that he was standing on the shoreline, watching a tsunami and mistaking it for a ripple. The double-glass doors of the precinct swung open with a violence that startled the desk sergeant. Julian Vance walked in. He didn't shout. He didn't look frantic. He looked like a monolith. His eyes swept the room, dissecting it in a heartbeat. He saw the desk sergeant. He saw Kowalski shrinking in his chair, and he saw Miller leaning against the counter with a smirk that was about to die a painful death. Julian walked straight to the desk. He placed his hands flat on the countertop. "I'm here for Marcus Vance," Julian said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a timbre that vibrated in the chest. It was the voice of a man used to commanding courtrooms. The desk sergeant blinked. "Processing. He's in holding. You can't see him until arraignment in the morning." "I'm not waiting for morning," Julian said. "I am seeing him now." Miller pushed himself off the counter. He stepped forward, entering Julian's personal space. "Hey, pal," Miller said, putting a hand up. "You deaf? Sarge said come back in the morning and move that SUV before I have it towed." Julian turned his head slowly to look at Miller. He looked at the name tag. Miller. The name Marcus had whispered in fear. "You are Officer Miller," Julian stated. It wasn't a question. "That's Sergeant Miller to you," Miller replied, puffing out his chest. "And you're trespassing in a secure area. Turn around and walk out, or you'll be joining your son in a cell." Julian stared at him. For a moment, the air in the room seemed to vanish. "You touched him," Julian said softly. "You put your hands on my son." Miller scoffed. "He resisted arrest. He got what he asked for. Now back off." He reached for his handcuffs. "That's it. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and—" Julian moved. It wasn't a strike. He reached into his back pocket with a speed that made Miller flinch. He pulled out the leather wallet and flipped it open. The gold badge gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. It wasn't the silver shield of a police officer. It was the heavy, ornate gold shield of the Attorney General. "I am Julian Vance," he announced, his voice suddenly rising, filling the room like thunder. "I am the Attorney General of this Commonwealth. I am the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of this state. And you, Sergeant Miller, are finished." Miller froze. His hand hovered over his handcuffs. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted from the badge to Julian's face, recognition finally dawning. He had seen this man on the news. He had seen him at press conferences. The desk sergeant dropped his pen. Oh, God. "Open the gate," Julian commanded, pointing a finger at the electronic lock that separated the lobby from the squad room. "Sir, Mr. Attorney General," Miller stammered, his face draining of color. We didn't know. He didn't say—" "He told you who he was," Julian roared, stepping closer, his restraint fraying. "He told you, and you beat him anyway. Open the damn gate." Miller didn't move. He was paralyzed by the sudden inversion of the power dynamic. But the door buzzed. The desk sergeant had hit the release. Julian pushed through the gate. He walked right up to Miller. He was 3 inches taller than the officer, and in that moment, 10 feet taller in stature. "Give me your weapon," Julian said. "What?" Miller blinked. "You are relieved of duty pending a federal investigation. Give me your weapon and your badge, now." "You can't. This is my precinct." "I am the state," Julian hissed. "Give it to me." Miller, shaking, unbuckled his holster. He handed the weapon to Julian, who cleared the chamber and placed it on the nearest desk with a clatter. "Where is he?" Julian demanded. Miller pointed a trembling finger toward the back hallway. Julian didn't spare him another look. He marched down the hallway, past the interrogation rooms, toward the cells. Behind him, the front doors burst open again. Sarah Jenkins and 6 state troopers in full tactical gear poured into the lobby. "Secure the building!" Sarah shouted. "Nobody leaves! Seize the servers! I want every hard drive pulled!" The raid had begun. The holding cell hallway was dim and quiet. Julian's sneakers squeaked on the linoleum. He looked into the cells. A drunk man sleeping, a woman crying. And then, in the last cell, Marcus was sitting on the bench, knees pulled to his chest. He was shivering. His varsity jacket was stained with dirt and blood. His left eye was swollen shut, a grotesque purple lump. His lip was split wide. Julian felt a physical blow to his heart. The rage that had fueled him evaporated, replaced by an agonizing, overwhelming love. "Marcus," he whispered. Marcus looked up. Through his good eye, he saw his father standing on the other side of the bars. "Dad!" Marcus's voice cracked. "I'm here, son, I'm here." Julian looked around for the keys. He didn't have them. He grabbed the bars and shook them, a futile gesture of frustration. "Open this door!" he bellowed down the hallway. Kowalski came running, a set of keys jingling in his hand. The young officer looked terrified. He fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking so hard he dropped the keys once. "I'm sorry," Kowalski whispered. "I'm sorry, sir." "Just open it," Julian said, not looking at him. The lock clicked. The heavy door swung open. Julian stepped inside. The smell of the cell, urine, and fear hit him. He knelt on the dirty concrete floor in front of his son. "Dad," Marcus sobbed, finally letting go. He pitched forward. Julian caught him. He wrapped his arms around the boy, holding him tight, mindful of the ribs, but needing to feel that he was alive. Marcus buried his face in his father's hoodie, weeping uncontrollably. "I didn't do it," Marcus cried. "I promise, Dad, I didn't do it." "I know," Julian said, stroking Marcus's hair, tears streaming down his own face now. "I know you didn't. I know who you are. Shh. I've got you." He held him there for a long moment, rocking him slightly. Then Julian pulled back. He gently touched Marcus's swollen face. "We need to get you to a hospital," Julian said softly. He helped Marcus stand. Marcus winced, clutching his side. "Can you walk?" "Yeah," Marcus gritted his teeth. "I can walk." Julian put his arm around Marcus's waist, taking the boy's weight. They walked out of the cell down the hallway. When they emerged into the squad room, the scene had changed completely. State troopers had secured the room. Officer Miller was sitting in a chair, handcuffed, his head in his hands. The captain of the precinct had arrived, looking disheveled and panicked, arguing with Sarah Jenkins. The room fell silent as Julian and Marcus appeared. All eyes turned to the battered teenager and the man supporting him. Julian stopped. He looked at Miller. Miller looked up, his eyes red. "You look at him," Julian said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You look at what you did." Miller looked away. "Captain," Julian said to the precinct commander. "Mr. Attorney General," the captain stammered. "This is a misunderstanding." "This is a crime scene," Julian corrected him cold. "My team is taking over. Anyone who interferes will be charged with obstruction of justice." He turned to the troopers. "Get me a medic now." As they walked toward the exit, Marcus leaned into his father. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Is it over?" Julian looked at the flashing lights outside, the gathering press, the beginning of a war he was about to wage on this department. "The nightmare is over, Marcus," Julian said. "But the reckoning, that's just getting started." The sterile scent of George Washington University Hospital was different from the cell, but it carried its own kind of trauma. It was the smell of iodine and floor wax, of hushed voices and beeping monitors. Marcus lay in a private room, the blinds drawn against the encroaching dawn. His face was a landscape of pain. The swelling around his left eye had deepened to a grotesque plum color, and 3 butterfly bandages held his split lip together. His torso was wrapped tight. 2 cracked ribs made every breath a negotiation with agony. Julian sat in the stiff armchair in the corner. He hadn't slept. He hadn't changed out of his hoodie. He just watched the rise and fall of his son's chest, a rhythm that was the only clock that mattered. A nurse entered quietly to check Marcus's vitals. She smiled sympathetically at Julian. "He's lucky, Mr. Vance. No internal bleeding, no concussion, though he has a mild contusion on the scalp. He'll heal, physically," Julian murmured, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "Yes, physically." The door opened again, and Sarah Jenkins slipped in. She looked exhausted, clutching 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Julian. "Update?" Julian asked, taking a sip of the black, bitter liquid. "We have Miller and Kowalski in separate holding facilities," Sarah said, keeping her voice low. Miller lawyered up immediately. The Fraternal Order of Police sent their top shark, Frank O'Connell. He's already spinning a narrative. Julian's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. Marcus was aggressive. Marcus was high. Marcus provoked a decorated veteran." "Textbook," Sarah nodded. "They released a statement 20 minutes ago. They're calling the arrest lawful and your intervention an abuse of power. They're trying to make this about you, Julian. The Attorney General thinks he's above the law." Julian stood up and walked to the window, peering through the slats at the parking lot below. News vans were already circling like vultures. "They want a war?" Julian whispered. "They have no idea." "They have the union behind them," Sarah warned. "O'Connell is dirty, but he's effective. He's going to dig into Marcus's past. He's going to leak anything he can find. A parking ticket, a bad grade, a rumor." Julian turned back to the bed. Marcus stirred, groaning softly. "Let them dig," Julian said. "My son is clean. And O'Connell, he's playing checkers. I'm playing chess." The counterattack began at noon. Frank O'Connell stood on the steps of the 4th Precinct, surrounded by a dozen off-duty officers in plain clothes. He was a small man with a face like a clenched fist, wearing a suit that cost more than Miller made in a month. "This is a witch hunt," O'Connell bellowed into the bouquet of microphones. "Sergeant Miller is a 20-year veteran with a commendation for bravery. He made a lawful stop of a vehicle suspected of trafficking narcotics. And what happens? The Attorney General, abusing the power of his office, storms a police station, assaults an officer, and frees the suspect without bail. This is tyranny." The media ate it up. The headlines shifted. Attorney General accused of overreach. Is Julian Vance protecting his son? Inside the AG's office, the mood was grim. Phones were ringing off the hook. Elena Russo, the special prosecutor, walked into Julian's temporary command center. "They leaked a photo," Russo said, slamming a tabloid onto the desk. It was a picture of Marcus from a high school Halloween party. He was holding a red Solo cup. The headline read, "Party Animal, the truth about the innocent student." "It's a soda," Julian said, his voice flat. "He doesn't drink." "It doesn't matter what it is," Russo said. "It matters what it looks like. They're trying to taint the jury pool before we even indict. They want the public to think Marcus is a thug so that Miller looks like a hero." Julian picked up the paper and crumpled it in his massive hand. "Focus on the evidence, Elena," he said. "Ignore the noise. Do we have the forensics back on the baggie?" "Preliminary results are coming in. It looks good for us. But we need more. We need a witness. Miller isn't talking." "What about Kowalski?" "He's terrified," Russo sighed. "He's stonewalling. He knows if he talks, he's a pariah, a dead man walking in blue." Julian looked at the live feed of O'Connell on the TV screen. "Then we need to break him. We need to show him that the blue wall isn't going to protect him. It's going to crush him." Officer Kowalski sat in the locker room of the precinct, his head in his hands. He had been released on his own recognizance pending the investigation, but he was suspended. He had come in only to clear out his locker. The room was silent, but it was a hostile silence. 3 other officers were changing shifts. They didn't look at him. They didn't speak. But the air was thick with contempt. Kowalski opened his locker. Inside, his uniform had been slashed. A dead rat sat on top of his boots, its mouth sewn shut with blue thread. He stumbled back, gasping. "Rough day, Rook?" Kowalski turned. It was Detective Haynes, a friend of Miller's. Haynes was leaning against the lockers, picking his teeth. "Someone vandalized my locker," Kowalski stammered. Did they? Haynes shrugged. I didn't see anything. Did you see anything, guys? The other officers shook their heads. Not a thing. Haynes walked closer, invading Kowalski's personal space. You know what happens to rats, Kowalski? They get stepped on. You keep your mouth shut about Miller. You stick to the story. Marcus reached for a gun. You saw it. Say it. I didn't see a gun, Kowalski whispered. Haynes grabbed him by the shirt collar, slamming him against the metal lockers. You saw what we tell you you saw. You have a wife, don't you? Pregnant? Be a shame if she had stress complications because her husband was a traitor. Haynes let go and patted Kowalski on the cheek. Smart kids make smart choices. Kowalski grabbed his box of personal items and ran. He drove aimlessly for hours, his hands shaking on the wheel. He kept seeing Miller's face. He kept seeing Marcus's swollen eye. He kept seeing the dead rat. He pulled into a gas station and sat there hyperventilating. His phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He answered it. Officer Kowalski, a woman's voice said. Sharp, professional. This is Elena Russo. I have nothing to say to you, Kowalski said, his voice trembling. I know about the rat, Thomas, Russo said. Kowalski froze. How? We have eyes everywhere, just like they do. Listen to me closely. Miller is going down. The forensics are irrefutable. The only question is, are you going down with him? Or are you going to be the man your wife thinks you are? They'll kill me, Kowalski sobbed. No, Russo said. They won't. Because you'll be in federal protective custody by dinner time. But only if you come in now. Right now. Kowalski looked at the dashboard. He looked at the badge he had worked so hard for, now sitting in a cardboard box on the passenger seat. It felt like lead. Where do I go? He asked. The following week was a whirlwind of legal precision that terrified the police union. While Marcus recovered at home, his face slowly healing from the bruising, Julian Vance was at work. He had officially recused himself from the prosecution to avoid any claim of bias, handing the reins entirely to Elena Russo. But his shadow loomed over every filing. The investigation centered on the digital forensics lab. Miller had been confident, banking on the unwritten rule that footage could be lost or corrupted. He had signaled Kowalski to make sure the dashcam video disappeared. But Kowalski, the nervous rookie, had been the weak link in Miller's chain of command. Whether out of fear of the Attorney General or the spark of conscience that Russo had fanned into a flame, Kowalski hadn't deleted the file. Instead, he had uploaded it to the backup server immediately upon returning to the station, a server that was now in federal custody. Russo sat in a soundproof room watching the footage on a large monitor. Beside her sat 2 FBI agents. The video was high definition. It showed the stop. It showed Marcus's polite, terrified compliance. It showed Miller's aggression. And then, at timestamp 23:42:15, it showed the truth. Miller stood by the driver's side door. His body was angled slightly away from the camera, but the reflection in the Audi's polished side mirror was crystal clear. Russo paused the video. Zoom in on Sector 4. The image enlarged. In the reflection, Miller's hand dipped into his own tactical vest. He pulled out a small plastic baggie. He held it in his palm for a second, checking it, before leaning into the car and pretending to retrieve it from under the seat. Got him, Russo whispered. That's planting evidence, federal felony. But the lie ran deeper. The baggie itself became the next piece of the puzzle. The lab technicians analyzed the contents. It was cocaine, but it wasn't street grade. It was 90% pure, cut with a specific chemical binding agent used in police training seizures or evidence lockers to track distribution. Russo traced the chemical marker. It matched a batch of narcotics seized by the 4th Precinct 3 months prior, a seizure led by Sergeant Miller. He didn't just plant drugs, Russo told the grand jury 2 days later. He stole evidence from his own precinct to frame innocent citizens. He wasn't enforcing the law, he was recycling crime. Miller was sitting in a federal detention center, stripped of his uniform, wearing an orange jumpsuit that strained against his bulk. He was still arrogant, convinced the union lawyers would get the evidence thrown out on a technicality. Frank O'Connell had visited him twice, promising him that the media strategy was working. Then the door opened and Elena Russo walked in. She didn't sit down. She threw a folder onto the metal table. "Your union rep isn't coming today, Miller," she said calmly. "I have rights," Miller sneered. "You have nothing," Russo corrected. "The union reviewed the dashcam footage. They voted this morning to withdraw support. You're on your own." Miller's face went slack. They can't do that. O'Connell said—" O'Connell lied. He's cutting his losses. But that's not the bad news. Russo opened the folder. The bad news is Officer Kowalski. Miller gripped the table. "The kid? He's loyal. He won't talk. Haynes had a talk with him." "Haynes is currently being arraigned for witness tampering," Russo said with a shark-like smile, "because Kowalski was wearing a wire when Haynes threatened him in the locker room." Miller turned pale. "Kowalski has been talking for 6 hours," Russo continued. "He told us about this stop. He told us about the incident last July with the kid in the BMW. He told us about the skimming from the evidence locker. He told us where you keep the drop guns in your garage." Russo leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Kowalski cut a deal, Miller. Immunity for testimony. He's going to walk, and you're going to die in prison." Miller slumped back, the arrogance draining out of him like water from a cracked vessel. For the first time, he looked small. "What do you want?" Miller croaked. "I don't want anything from you," Russo said, taking the folder back. "I have everything I need. I just wanted to see the look on your face when you realized the blue wall fell on you." The trial of United States versus Miller was the highest-profile case the state had seen in a decade. The courtroom was packed every day. Julian Vance sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. He wore a dark suit, his face a mask of stoic judgment. He never spoke to the press, never made a scene. He just watched. His presence was a constant, crushing weight on the defense. Miller's defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, tried to paint Marcus as a threat. He brought up the Halloween photo. He tried to argue that the reflection in the mirror was a trick of the light. It was pathetic. When Marcus took the stand, the courtroom went silent. He walked with a slight limp, his ribs still healing. He looked young, vulnerable, but his voice was steady. "He didn't see me," Marcus told the jury, looking directly at Miller. "He didn't see a student. He didn't see a son. He saw a target. I did everything I was taught to do to stay alive, and it wasn't enough." "Why do you think he did it?" the defense attorney asked, trying to bait him into an angry outburst. Marcus paused. He looked at his father, then back at the jury. "Because he thought he could," Marcus said softly. "Because he thought no one would care about one more black boy on the side of the road. He thought he was the law. But the law is supposed to protect us, not hunt us." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. He didn't look at Miller. "We find the defendant regarding count 1, deprivation of rights under color of law, guilty. Count 2, falsifying evidence, guilty. Count 3, assault with a dangerous weapon, guilty." The guilties rang out like hammer blows. 19 counts in total. Miller closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. The sentencing hearing was where the karma truly hit. Because Miller was a former officer convicted of federal crimes, he wasn't eligible for the cushy camp prisons often reserved for white-collar criminals. And because he had betrayed the badge, he was despised by the general population and the guards alike. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, looked down at Miller over her spectacles. "Mr. Miller, you took an oath," she said. "You used the power of the state to terrorize the people you were sworn to serve. You are a predator in a uniform." She sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison, no parole. But the punishment didn't end with the gavel. As Miller was led away in chains, his wife was already filing for divorce, taking full custody of their children. His pension, which he had worked 20 years to secure, was stripped by the state to pay for the civil settlement to Marcus Vance. The 4th Precinct was purged. The captain was forced into early retirement. A federal oversight committee was installed to review every arrest made by the unit in the last 5 years. Frank O'Connell, the union rep, was quietly fired by the National Board for his handling of the PR disaster. And on the steps of the courthouse, Julian Vance finally spoke. He stood next to Marcus, his hand on his son's shoulder. The microphones were thrust in their faces. "Mr. Attorney General," a reporter shouted, "is this justice?" Julian looked at the camera. "Justice isn't a verdict," he said. "Justice is a world where I don't have to teach my son how to survive a traffic stop. Today was accountability. Justice is the work we have left to do." 6 months later, the bruises had faded from Marcus's skin, but the memory remained. A scar on his psyche that would never fully heal. He sat on the porch of their Potomac home, the acceptance letter to Georgetown Law School in his hand. Julian walked out, handing him a glass of iced tea. They watched the sun dip below the tree line, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold, the same colors of the lights that night, but now soft, forgiving. "You saved me, Dad," Marcus said quietly. "No," Julian replied, looking at the young man who had faced the fire and come out forged in steel. "I just made a call. You survived, and now you're going to make sure no one else has to make that call again." The karma was complete. The abuser was in a cage, stripped of name and power, while the boy he tried to break was rising to become the very thing Miller feared most, a man who knew the law and how to wield it.